Summary of an Imaginary Life by David Malouf. Ovid, a famous poet from ancient Rome, claims that he used to see the child, whom the locals refer to as the wild boy, while he was in his younger years. They talked together in a language that I don't know. The child stayed the same age, even as Ovid got older. Ovid never told anyone else about the child, and when Ovid became an adult, the child vanished. As an adult, Ovid lives in Tomis, a small town on the edge of the Roman Empire, miles away from anything that looks like a city. He dislikes it. The land is empty and wild, and the town is small and bland. No one in the town speaks Latin, and Ovid can't speak it either. This makes him even more alone. Ryzak, the head of the town, takes care of Ovid while he is in exile. Even though he was once a very important person in Rome, Emperor Augustus sent him to Tomis because of his radical poems. One day, Ovid sees a single red flower in the town. It is a poppy, which he knows. Ovid decides that he needs to transform himself in his new world because he remembers a name and sees a splash of color on the ground. Ovid thinks that he is weak and useless compared to Ryzak, who is strong and tough. His life of comfort and ease has made him soft. Ryzak and the other hunters go to the birchwoods to hunt deer, and Ovid goes with them. However, Ryzak has to teach him how to ride a horse without a saddle. Before they get to the birchwoods, the locals stop at their burial grounds, where horsemen have been put to rest for generations. Ryzak shows Ovid how to respect the dead by riding through the grave mounds, shouting, and throwing grain as a gift. Even though Ovid doesn't believe in gods, the rite gives him a certain thrill. When the hunters get to the birchwoods, a tracker shows them a bare human footprint in the snow next to the deer tracks. Ryzak shows the locals with hand signals that the prints belong to a wild boy who has been seen in the bush for 2 years by the villagers. Ovid has a lot of questions, but he can't ask any of them because they don't speak the same language. He sees the boy hiding in the bushes, and some shooters try to catch him but can't. The rest of the day, they hunt and then go back to Tomis. Winter always ends. Ovid thinks the season is terrible because everyone just stays in their huts until the snow starts to melt, and sometimes barbaric groups come and raid them. Ovid can tell that the boy is the same kid he knew when he was a kid, so he asks Ryzak to send out a search party in the spring. The locals, on the other hand, are too busy working and getting food. When the hunters go back to the birchwoods in the fall, they can't find any sign of the child. Ovid is afraid that he died during the hard winter before. Soon, it will be winter again, and then spring will come. Ovid starts to understand some of what the locals are saying, and he notices that their language is very different from the Latin he knows. Latin separates and explains, but the language of the people just looks at life as a whole and accepts it. That fall, Ovid sees the child again in the birch woods. Ovid really wants to meet him, but it seems like the other hunts are scared of him. At night, Ovid gives the child a bowl of gruel. He dreams that he is a pool of water in the dirt where a deer and the child drink. While this is going on, the child eats from Ovid's bowl. When Ovid wakes up and sees this, he hopes that the boy is now linked to the human world because he ate from something made by people. Another year goes by, and Ovid gets stronger and better at speaking the language of the town. He starts to like how simple life is in Tomis and how the colors in the scenery change in subtle ways. The world looks different to him now that he speaks a new language. Near his hut, he plants a small yard of wildflowers. The women in the village think he is stupid because flowers aren't useful for life, and Ovid is sad that the locals don't know what it means to play. In the winter of that year, Ovid talks Ryzak into sending a search party in the spring to find the child and bring it back to Tomis. When winter ends and the snow melts, riders find the boy in the birchwoods and bring him home. He shrieks and howls until the healer sings to him, putting the child into a long, deep sleep. The child sleeps in Ovid's hut for the first 2 weeks, even though it is awake. The people in the village are afraid of the boy because they think he has an animal spirit or is a monster. After 2 weeks, Ovid can tell that the child is starting to get smarter. He is interested in how Ovid writes with a pen and ink, so he tries them out himself. Ovid starts to take the child out into the swamps, toward the river Ister, where he tries to teach the child how to make human sounds and the child shows him how to make animal sounds. Ovid says that when the child makes a bird call, it seems like he is becoming the bird instead of just imitating it. So, Ovid thinks that the child will turn into a man if he can talk like a person. The child keeps telling Ovid more about plants and animals. Ovid plans to teach the child the language of Tomis. This makes Ovid even more sure that he will never go back to Rome. He tries to understand how the child thinks, how he identifies with nature instead of thinking of himself as different from it, but it's hard for him to let go of his sense of self. As winter gets closer, Ovid worries about how it will affect the child, since they will have to stay inside with Ryzak and his family for the whole season. Ryzak tells Ovid that everything will be fine, but Ryzak's mother, the old woman, is afraid of the child and thinks he has a monster inside of him. When it starts to snow and Ovid tries to bring the child inside, the child goes crazy. He screams and scratches at the walls until he gets tired and falls asleep. The child hasn't spoken or moved for weeks, and all it does is stare into the darkness. Ovid is worried that they are going backwards and missing any gains they made over the summer. The child gets a high fever that makes him shake violently. He doesn't seem to know where he is. Ryzak's mother thinks the monster is trying to get out and may be looking for a new person to take over. She tells everyone to stay away from the child, and Ovid is afraid that if she gets the chance, she will kill the boy. Ovid keeps an eye on him for days as the child gets weaker and keeps shaking. During a particularly bad seizure, Ryzak's daughter-in-law goes against the old woman and helps Ovid care for the child. The child starts to feel better, but Ryzak's grandson Lulo gets sick instead. Even Lulo's mother, Ryzak's daughter-in-law, fears that the child's devil has passed into her son. Ovid looks on in fear, thinking that if Lulo dies, he and the child will be in a lot of trouble. After many days, Lulo gets better, but Ryzak gets sick with a fever instead. The old woman finds small teeth marks on Ryzak's wrist. She thinks that this is where the devil got into his body. Ryzak also shakes and makes sounds that even Ovid thought were not human. So that Ryzak's spirit doesn't get taken over by the monster, the older people in the town decide to kill him themselves. During the process, which includes a complicated rite, Ovid takes the child and runs away from Tomis, knowing that their lives are now in danger because the village blames the child for the death of their leader. Ovid and the child cross the river Ister into the northern desert, where the barbarian groups live. Ovid doesn't feel sad about leaving another home because he feels like he's fulfilling his fate by going on the trip that will bring about his final change. He and the child journey for months with nowhere to go and don't even keep track of the days. Now that the child is back in the woods, he is getting stronger, and Ovid feels like he finally knows the language of nature that the child tried to teach him. Ovid feels like he is just a small part of the universe, like a blade of grass. He thinks that everything is linked and that the universe is a whole. Ovid can feel his body getting weaker as he gets older. He is dead. But as the child takes care of him in his last days, Ovid feels unbearably happy because the child is now free. Ovid knows that when he dies, he will go back to the earth, where he came from. His body will then be able to feed the land. He feels like he's been around forever and that he has no body. He feels complete.
About the author. David Malouf was born in Brisbane, Australia, in 1934. Malouf was a big reader from a young age. By the time he was 12, he was reading hard books like Wuthering Heights by Emily Bront. He was born in Australia and went to school there until he got his degree in 1955. He was a professor at his old school for a few years before moving to London, where he taught at several universities until 1968. After that, Malouf went back to Australia to teach at the University of Sydney. He did this for 10 years until he quit to become a full-time writer. In 1975, while he was still teaching in Sydney, Malouf released his first book, Jono, which was a semi-autobiographical story about growing up in Brisbane. It sold well, and in 2004, it was turned into a play. In 1978, he wrote An Imaginary Life, a story about the Roman author Ovid's time in exile. Critics liked the way it was written and how it was put together. During the 1980s, Malouf wrote a number of prize-winning books and short stories about Australia. He also created a number of plays. Malouf wrote a book called Remembering Babylon in 1993. It was about Scottish homesteaders who moved to Australia and had to deal with their own racism and fears. The book won a long list of awards, including the prestigious Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and was on the shortlist for the prestigious Booker Prize for Fiction. Malouf kept working until 2018, when he said he was done. He left behind many works of fiction, non-fiction, diaries, plays, poetry collections, and librettos for operas. Malouf lives in Sydney.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.